In early 18th century Europe, when the Habsburg Empire stood at the height of its power and Hungary was treated as nothing more than a tax-producing frontier, a rebellion erupted that was not just a war but a declaration of dignity. And at the center of this struggle stood Ferenc Rákóczi II, a man born into privilege who could have lived comfortably under imperial rule but instead chose exile, loss, and resistance because after decades of Ottoman wars, Hungary had been left devastated. Villages burned, farmland abandoned, and ordinary people crushed under heavy taxation imposed from Vienna, forced military conscription, and religious pressure that targeted Protestants in favor of imperial Catholic control, creating a society where resentment simmered quietly until it finally boiled over, giving rise to the Kyrgyz rebels, who at first were little more than desperate peasants, escaped soldiers, and outlawed fighters, lacking discipline but fueled by anger. And when Rákóczi returned from Poland in 1703 and publicly called for Hungarian independence, that scattered anger suddenly unified into a national uprising built on a simple promise of freedom, land, and justice, drawing tens of thousands to his cause as Kyrgyz forces swept through Transylvania and Upper Hungary, capturing towns and fortresses with surprising speed, alarming Vienna and briefly making it seem possible that Hungary might break free from Habsburg rule. But Rákóczi understood that passion alone could not defeat an empire. So he pursued diplomacy as aggressively as warfare, reaching out to France under Louis XIV, who was locked in conflict with the Habsburgs and saw strategic value in supporting a rebellion that could weaken his rival. And while some aid arrived, it was inconsistent and never enough to fully sustain the movement. Yet by 1705, the Hungarian Diet went so far as to declare Rákóczi the ruling prince, a powerful symbolic act that signaled political legitimacy, even as military realities grew more difficult because the Kyrgyz army, though brave and motivated, lacked professional training, stable supply lines, and modern equipment, while the Habsburg forces were experienced, well-funded, and supported by a broader European alliance, turning the conflict into a grinding war of attrition that wore down the countryside, exhausted the peasantry, and slowly eroded the early enthusiasm of the rebellion. As famine and disease spread, and the population paid the price of prolonged war, and the turning point came in 1708 at the Battle of Trencsén, where a chaotic defeat shattered Kyrgyz morale, made worse when Rákóczi himself fell from his horse during the fighting, and rumors spread that he had been killed, causing panic and retreat at a critical moment, after which the Habsburgs regained momentum and steadily reconquered lost territory, even as Rákóczi tried to adapt by proposing reforms that went far beyond medieval privilege, including freeing serfs, restructuring taxation, and imagining a modern Hungarian state built on broader participation rather than aristocratic dominance. But by then international support had faded. France was overextended and focused elsewhere. Russia offered words but no real commitment, and by 1711 many Kyrgyz leaders, facing exhaustion and the risk of total annihilation, chose negotiation as the only path left, leading to the Peace of Sathmar, which ended the war by granting Hungarian nobles limited rights and amnesty. But stopping far short of true independence, a compromise Rákóczi refused to accept, choosing instead the loneliness of exile over submission, moving first to France and later to the Ottoman Empire, where he spent his final years in the town of Tekrdag, far from the land he fought for, knowing he would likely never return. Yet despite the military defeat, the Rákóczi War of Independence permanently changed Hungary's political consciousness, because it proved that resistance to imperial rule was possible, that national identity could be mobilized across class lines, and that loyalty to an empire was not inevitable, forcing the Habsburgs themselves to recognize that Hungary could not be ruled by force alone without consequence, making this conflict less a failed rebellion and more a foundational moment in Hungarian nationalism, one that echoes through later uprisings and reforms. And today Rákóczi is remembered not simply as a rebel prince, but as a symbol of moral resistance, a reminder that even when a movement loses on the battlefield, it can still win in shaping identity, values, and the future. Because the legacy of this war is not measured in territory gained or lost, but in the enduring idea that people are not born merely to be governed, taxed, and silenced, but to demand a voice in their own destiny, a message that resonates far beyond Hungary and speaks directly to any society that has ever challenged concentrated power. In the name of freedom,